Welcome to Planet Marzipan Podcast,
your fish and Marillion podcast,
where we talk about all things in the planet of Marillion and fish. I'm Mezza, and here's my mate,
Craig Houston.
Hello, and welcome to Planet Marzipan Podcast. I'm Mezza, I'm here with my good friend,
Craig.
And we have guests. We have esteemed guests this week.
We have big guests.
Big guests. We have Andrew Wilde, who's here to talk about his new book, A Mirror of Dreams.
Hello to you both, and you can call me Andy if you wish. That's great.
That will be lovely, Andy. Thank you for that. And we have Greg Spawton, who's here with his publisher hat on.
Yes.
On behalf of Kingmaker Publishing.
Yeah.
So welcome, gents. Thank you very much for joining.
Nice to be here.
Andy, do you want to tell us a little bit about the synopsis of the book, and then we can sort of delve into the detail of it?
Absolutely. It's the book that I've written, or books, as it turned out now, it's plural. That wasn't the plan originally. Centres around the Marquee Club in the early 80s. I'm slightly too young to have gone to the Marquee, or slightly too far away as well, being grown up in Stockport. But I remember seeing Twelfth Night at the end of 1984 and buying their Live and Let Live album, which was recorded at the Marquee. And that was kind of a door into a very, very vibrant scene that kind of built in the early 80s, was extremely busy and popular, 83, 84, 85, and then kind of tailed away a little bit as the 80s kind of ended. And pretty much for 2, 3, 4 years, you could see one of a group of similar kind of bands in the Marquee. Pretty much every week you could see one or more of these bands. And that the story of those 6 bands, how they kind of helped each other, intertwined, supported each other, were rivals with each other, had never really been told. So I'd done a number of books before. I wrote the Twelfth Night biography in 2007. I wrote the Galahad biography in 2012, I think it was. And then a couple of years ago, I was asked to write Jeff Mann's biography.
Yeah.
I worked quite closely with Brian Devoyle and the guys from Twelfth Night on a number of projects. So I was quite honoured to do that. And we made it official by asking Jeff's widow, Jane, to be involved. And the ex-members of the Jeff Mann band and Twelfth Night were all part of that. And that was a delightful, delightful project. And around about that time, I got a random text message from a certain Gregory Spawton of Big Big Train. So Greg approached me maybe about 3 years ago, probably, Greg, I think, when we first spoke. Greg was doing a bit of research for the Big Big Train biography.
Yes.
And Big Big Train supported Galahad way back in the midst of time when they were doing live concerts in the early 90s. And I was able to confirm some dates and contribute a tiny little bit to that book. And Greg and I continued to communicate reasonably frequently, just talking music and usual blokey bullshit, right? But when the Jeff Mann book came along, Greg told me that he'd found his scrapbook with some unseen photographs of certain people, certain people of Twelfth Night at, remind me which club it was at, Greg?
This sounds like a very dodgy scrapbook as you're presenting.
I'm sure they'll edit that bit out.
It's not like that at all. I was kind of sort of quite a geeky, nerdy kind of teenager, and so I had scrapbooks of 12th Night, Solstice, Marillion, and the other prog bands of the early 80s. And I had shots. I used to take a camera along to gigs, and so I had shots from the General Wolf in Coventry particularly, but also some from the Marquee and from the Reading Festival, etc., etc., etc. So I had a kind of a sort of beginnings of a database for elements of the book that Andrew, or the books that Andrew has gone on to write.
Yeah.
A little treasure trove, really, isn't it?
It was great because we were able to use one or two of Greg's photographs in the Jeff Mann biography, which kudos for that book as well.
Yeah.
Unpublished photograph by Gregory Spawton and all that stuff. That went out for pre-order and sold out within 3 days, which is incredible. So
fantastic.
It completely floored us with the success of it. And it was around about that time where, and I can't remember the context of the conversation now, Greg, but I was invited to pitch for the project that Greg had in his mind for several years as part of the publishing company he'd set up with Nick Shilton, the Big Train manager.
Yes.
So that came completely out of the blue for me. But I did have a little bit of a past history, having written the 12th Night book, having seen some of the bands at the time, having kind of proven with the Jeff Mann project that you can start with a blank sheet of paper and do the research to make a human story. And I think that's what we really wanted in the end, was a human story of, and this is reflected in the titles of the two books, of wishing for something to happen, making it happen to a degree, to a level of success, if you like, and then somehow it just kind of escapes from your grasp and faded away. And even though nearly everybody who we spoke to is still active in some way, it's really only Marillion that kind of broke through and had any kind of commercial success from those 6 bands that we do.
Yeah.
So that was the kind of the principle, is focusing on the Marquee as the epicenter, if you like, of that. Focus on the history of those 6 bands and how they got to start doing headlining slots at the Marquee. Explain how they kind of cross-fertilize each other by supporting each other, playing at the same festivals. And how eventually it was only one of those 6 bands who were able to get through the door of the big record companies before it was slammed behind for the others. And that was quite a long and rambling answer, but I think we got there.
No,
no.
It's. I mean, thank you. You sent us a pre-release copy of the book, and I'm about 25% of the way, and you missed this, Jeff. When we were first on the call, I was saying that it's fantastic. It really is, the detail that it goes into. I mean, it's centered around. You've interviewed lots of people, but it's centered around 6 prog bands, isn't it? Yep. So it's Marillion, IQ, Pallas, Pendragon, Solstice, and 12th Night.
That's it. And those are the 6 that we considered to be the big 6 bands. However, during the interview process, I interviewed members of another 17 bands who were in that scene. And this will all be in volume 2. So we're thinking here of Haze and Trilogy. We've got Pride of Passion. We've got Liaison, and so on and so on. And these were the bands that supported those big 6 in the big gigs they did. And again, almost broke through. So in the end, I think I interviewed 85 musicians.
And over what period of time was that?
The first one was Alan Reid. I've known Alan for quite a few years, so I was really pleased that he was the first one up. And that was probably, we started the project in February last year. I did about 8 weeks of research. That takes us to April. So the interviews took place between April and October last summer. The final one was Mark Kelly, who I did a video call with in October, and he was very, very helpful. So in that period, Greg sat on some of the interviews we did on Zoom. So Greg and I interviewed Steve Rothery together, and Mick together, Andy Revel together, and Ewan Lowson, some of these people.
Andy Glass as well.
And Andy Glass we did, and Brian DeVoyle. We did those together. And Steph. Yeah. Some of the interviews I did on the phone. So I interviewed Ian Mosley on the phone, for example. Neil Cockle, who was the early member of Marillion, I interviewed him on the phone. I did some by email, quite a lot by email. And I did one face-to-face interview, which was terrific. I went to Sheffield to meet Chris McMahon, who's the founder of Hayes. Called Hayes.
Yeah. In
the cellar, the same cellar.
Did you? Yeah. Cellar replay, yeah.
That's right.
Fantastic tape, yeah.
That's right. Chris was absolutely lovely, because where I am in the hills of the Peak District, it's only a 40-minute sprint over to Sheffield. So,
Hayes were one of the only bands that came to York. So Hayes would play the pubs in York, because obviously Sheffield's not a million miles away.
That's right.
So we would regularly, me and my prog mates would go and see Hayes a lot, almost every other week in the pubs in town.
So the way it worked was this: I did that 8-week research period, which was pretty intense. Put some feelers out amongst various fan bases contacted the archivists of all the bands involved, like Mike Bentley, who runs the Pallas stuff for them, and John Dunnington, who's involved in Pendragon, Mark Hughes, who looks after IQ. These are all fans who have their own archives and their own contacts. Quite a lot of people sent me boxes worth of newsletters and clippings, which is a terrifying responsibility. It's badges and patches and programs and you name it. So over those 8 weeks, I built a timeline from we started in 1978. We really go into detail in 1981. We have almost day by day up to the end of 1988, which is into volume 2 for us. And then we do a catch-up chapter at the end of what they're doing now. So those 8 weeks was pretty intense, building genuine facts, just facts, which, is all very well, but leaves for a very dry book at the end of the day.
Yes.
Right. And Greg always said to me, Greg is my editor here and my guide, if you like, and what we're trying to achieve is, he says, these are human stories. We want human photographs and human voices in the book. So Greg and I built a wish list of who we'd like to interview. And unbelievably, we got just about everybody to be involved eventually. It kind of grew until there was a tipping point last summer whereby suddenly people were realizing that if they didn't get involved, then it would be
miss out.
They would miss out.
Yeah, but I think
we won't name names because we're not in the business of naming names. But 1 or 2 characters were quite tricky to pin down, but eventually we're happy to be involved.
Well, there's one character we couldn't pin down,
and one in particular we couldn't pin down.
I don't know if you've had him on your show, but Fish would not refuse to be interviewed.
Did he?
Yeah, he did, and it really annoyed me because Fish is not a man, as we all know, short of a word or two.
No, true.
And in fact, as I understand it, he spent half an hour talking to Nick Shilton, my co-publisher, explaining why he wouldn't do it. And I just thought, well, you could have just spent that half an hour answering half a dozen questions, and
absolutely,
and that would be it. So I know I was a little bit put out by that, but we've done everything we can to capture his voice in there from contemporary sources, etc.
Yeah.
And most importantly, I think this is, as Andrew's saying, there's a lot of humanity in the story. In fact, at times it's it's almost like a Greek tragedy at times. There's some really emotional moments in there. A couple that spring to mind for me that came up during the interviews was Mick losing his place in Marillion. That's an extraordinary.
Yeah, he was very, very open, wasn't he, with us? Greg?
Yeah, he was, and it was one of the most. I was very privileged to sit in on that interview. He was extremely open, very frank.
Yeah,
still quite clearly raw for him, I think, at times. Albeit he's done great to get his musical life back.
Did he stop playing for a while after that?
Yeah,
about
he did.
10 or 12 years. Yeah.
He did.
Incredible, and that's really hard because obviously the band were in the media, so he was constantly being reminded about it.
I can't imagine what that would. Well, in fact, we asked him. I mean, what is it like? Again, another one that was because I was a guitarist back in the early '80s. I'm a bass player now, but so I kind of cherry picked sitting on interviews with guitar players, Steve, and mainly guitar players, Steve and Andy, and etc. So I was quite intrigued by Andy Revell from Twelfth Night because their story was very interesting, and they were very. I think one of the themes of the book is that Fish's extremely big stage presence in every meaning of that word is a absolutely why or one of the key reasons why that band broke through when the others didn't.
Yeah.
And I think Twelfth Night had a similar leader really in Jeff Mann. But of course, when he left, Andy was a great singer to follow up, but it just didn't quite.
Very different, wasn't it?
Changed the dynamic.
And
very changed the dynamic.
Yeah,
they lost something. We had a very good, very interesting conversation with Andy Revell, and we said, what was it like when it really came to an end? And Andy's become a really super successful guy in a different life,
Yes.
But he took a pause, and it was quite emotional, really, because it clearly was quite a profound impact on him. When you've got your hopes and dreams, and they fall away, nothing seemingly, and you've got to almost restart your life. I think that was a profoundly human sort of thing, and that's what Andrew's tried to capture in the book. This is I I didn't want a dry telling of just facts. It's full of good anecdotes and storytelling and the story of a bunch of mainly young guys who are trying to, do their very best, make their best music and to make a living in a very difficult world.
Yeah. And at the time, I mean, when a lot of these bands were starting out, as you said, the story sort of started in 78. So you're on the tail end of the punk era. So it's a very strange sort of music to be getting into.
Totally. And I don't know what you guys are like, but when in the early 80s, the kind of height of the prog scene in 76, 77 seemed like a million years ago. I mean, now it looks ludicrous because it was 4 or 5 years before.
Yeah.
And so when these bands came through and I started picking up sounds and Kerrang and they were being written about, and I was, because I'm a little bit older than Andrew, although I don't look
only a year, Greg.
I was able to go and see a lot of these shows at the Marquee, etc. So I've got totally embroiled in this very exciting. It was a very exciting scene, and to see it all play out in the sort of weekly music papers was an extraordinary thing for all of us involved at that time. But yeah, looking back, it just felt like it was completely improbable that prog would return. It just didn't seem that was possible because punk and new wave and new romanticism had sort of blown it all out of the water. But there it was, and there was and it was also the other interesting thing, or one of many interesting things that Andrew discovered just looking at the photos, is really the age of the audience in the early 80s. It wasn't a bunch of hippies from. There was one guy called Jesus. He was literally called Jesus.
I met him.
You met Jesus.
I can
Sorry, this is taking a whole dark turn here.
I met him at the a Fish gig at Hammersmith Odeon. It was the Andy Field Memorial gig. And he was sitting just.
You've never told me that before.
No, it's just because he was a strange character. He was a strange character in that audience. I bet it once.
Greg, sorry.
There were a handful of Jesus-like characters around that had clearly been around a bit soon. But most of us were young, and it was mainly young guys. There were a few girls that liked Stephanie, but mainly it was the young guys. And one of the that's the thing that for me. Obviously my band is Big Train, but also in the audience was very young Stephen Wilson, who's much as he'd hate to admit it, is the most successful progressive rock artist of the last 20 years.
Well, it depends what week it is, whether he's calling himself prog or not, doesn't it? Really, but
it depends whether. There is a bit of that, and I noticed that his next album is being sold as 2 20-minute pieces. So
we're going back.
He's fallen back in love with it, but he was there too. Jerry Ewing was there, so there were some key players there, and they, their subsequent careers are built on that early 80s scene, not the 70s scene. Okay, Big Train is all about 12-string guitars and 70s influenced music, but generally speaking, we wouldn't be here today, and neither would Jerry and Stephanie, etc., if it wasn't for the excitement that 80s scene generated, with your band, Marillion, of course, at the absolute forefront of it.
And do you think that the new wave of British heavy metal kind of gave it kind of came in on the coattails of that?
I don't know about the coattails. I think it was in parallel with the two.
Yeah. I think it was very. I think it was a useful. I remember reading in Kerrang at the time, new wave of British heavy metal, and then new wave of prog. It was neo prog as it became known as. But I think it was very handy that they could kind of. Yeah, we hate that phrase. It's very handy that they could kind of package it up in that way.
I'm thinking EMI really, because EMI had great success with Maiden, and then the blueprint was there and did a very similar thing with Marillion.
That's fair.
And I think there's a lot of fan crossover at the time.
You're absolutely right, Craig. Yeah, definitely crossover between the two. And
you wouldn't think necessarily with some of the styles of music, but it was a definite crossover with the fans.
Well, you think about the Reading Festival, which is in those days was very much seen as a kind of the heavier side of music. And yet in 1983, 5 of the 6 bands we wrote about all appeared at the Reading Festival. And the other band were there in the audience, and so Marillion were on the bill in 82, and again in 83, second only to, I think it was Black Sabbath with Ian Gillan singing, I think in the 83. And one of the amazing things, a couple of the most amazing things about that particular event, we found a photograph of Jeff Mann holding a mirror You may have seen this, John.
I've
Johnny.
seen it
Yeah.
actually, and Greg's in the mirror, isn't he? Yeah.
Greg is reflected in the mirror, and we both had to sit back and kind of process what we'd just seen.
Yeah, it was bizarre. Absolutely bizarre.
That was the first really weird thing. And then the second one, which still makes me laugh. Greg was showing us some photographs when we were doing an interview with a guy called Mark Hughes, who's a good friend of IQ and Twelfth Night. And we found a really good picture of Jeff and Rick Battersby of Twelfth Night backstage at the Reading Festival that Greg had taken. And Greg, sometimes his memory fails him from many years ago, and he wasn't sure if it was his picture or somebody else's picture, right? So we shared the picture on the screen, and Greg said to Mark Hughes, "Have you seen this picture before? Is this one of yours?" He said, No, it's not one of mine, because that's me in the picture along with Jeff and Rick.
Yeah, that was nice. That was good. I nearly fell off my chair then, because we were interviewing, and that's again, that's it. There's a lot of people, a lot of memories from that period, and in terms of getting the book or the books going, I felt we had a kind of window really now to capture those memories before people get too old or too disinterested. And as a publisher,
Sorry, Greg.
I want to sell as many books as I can. So, again, it's important to capture those things when people are interested. And I've said before, but I think if I look out into a big trained audience in the UK for sure, then the demographic is clearly different from the demographic of the early 80s. It's clearly guys mainly that were probably there during the early 80s. I think the people that were heavily involved in the early 80s scene have often stayed with progressive rock in a way that maybe 70s followers haven't so much.
I think you're right. I think this was one of the points I made very early on when we were discussing the approach we should take, that the people who were involved and the people who were there are now in their 50s and 60s, right? So that's the four of us, for sure.
Well,
generally pretty well read, and therefore probably have got a little bit of money tucked away and can spend a bit of money on stuff.
Yeah.
And we're doing this call on video, but you can see behind all four of us lots of stuff, actual physical things. So the opportunity to do a good book, high quality book, a nice paper, lots of photographs that told the story well, but illustrated the story well also was very appealing to me. And the original plan was to write, you have to remind me, Greg, was it 110,000 words? Something like that, I think it was originally. That was surpassed very, very quickly to the point where I wrote 250,000 words.
Wow.
And we had some long chats about how we should market this, because no one wants to read 250,000 words in a single book. And actually, it was in a conversation we had. It was in a video call we had with Francis Dunnery of It Bites, who are featured extensively in Volume 2. And I'm sure you know Frank. He's a character.
Oh yeah,
he is. He's very outspoken. He's frank.
Totally outspoken. And I've known him for quite a long time because we used to work for the same radio station together for prog.com. And we had a good chat with Frank, and we said we'd got too many words. We weren't sure what to do. And he said, "Well, split it into two, make it into 2 books, do it as a box set, And actually, the pennies or the scales fell from our eyes. Is that right?
Yeah.
Is that the right phrase? And Greg and I chatted about this, and then we spoke to Nick, our publisher, and we thought this makes total sense, because why skim on the story that we wanted to tell to squeeze it into a single volume when we can expand it through? So both books are written, both books are edited. We've chosen the photographs for both volumes. The first one's coming out June this year, and the second one will be probably early next year.
Yeah.
We've got the titles and the front covers all ready to roll. So both books are written in parallel. 85 interviews went into both volumes.
The writing's fantastic, but the pictures are equally fantastic.
They're almost as fantastic.
Mainly unseen, aren't they?
Mostly unseen, actually. And that was a really, really some of the most satisfying things were when people would contact you and say, "I found a lot of photographs in my loft," or in one case, "I found a lot of negatives. Do you want them?" We'd go, "Yeah, please." Yeah.
Could be anything, yeah.
Well, say, but
Check it first.
even very late on in the day, even towards the back end of last year when we were putting the book to bed, we found a couple of incredible sources. And Greg and I would speak pretty much daily during that period, and I would say, "What about this one?" And we just could not believe the quality of these pictures that were being provided to us. And you probably can't tell so much on the proof copy that you've got, but when you'll see it physically in your hand with the brilliant pictures, and the ones in the second volume, I think, are even better than the ones in the first, to be honest.
It was interesting days because I used to take there are some pictures of mine in both volumes, and I would take my brother's camera, Fujika, to gigs, and not many people had cameras with them, but a few people did. And it was about the right balance because it wasn't like now where, when I'm on stage, I'll stare out in the audience and there's maybe 300 people with
cameras
filming
phones
us,
in it,
which is off-putting. We get used to it, but I think if you're standing behind somebody, it can be a bit annoying. But back in the early 80s, there were only maybe 5 people at each show that had a camera, and they would be, the bands weren't stopping it being used. I'd go into the Marquee without any hassle with this Fujika camera. And so there is a treasure trove of mostly unseen photos. A few of them are spinning out onto the internet, which is fine. But I think it's lovely to have them in a book. It just feels less ephemeral when they're actually recorded in a book. So yeah, we've been we had a couple of little gaps, and we reach out to people like Andy Glass, who'd reach out across the Atlantic to a former bandmate who'd dig something out of his attic. It was a real Indiana Jones tale at times of just trying to find good quality photos, and they're still coming out the woodwork now. It's too late.
Volume 3 and 4.
Well, there's a couple of, as I say, I'm only about 25% of the way through the book, but I've already seen, there's a great photo of Mick Pointer with Electric Gypsy. And another one of Rothers played with Pegasus in 79.
Yeah.
Brilliant archive photos.
So the first one of those,
some of the stories from those early days with the bands just first coming together again in the late 70s. So like a couple of years after the height of original prog, but when prog was considered to be no longer an acceptable thing to be playing. So yeah, those early photos are fantastic, and some of the early stories are some of my favorites as well. With like Steve Rothery just driving down from
just
an extraordinary thing. A young
and
guy
he gets
like
there,
that,
and the guys are all hungover and not expected it.
Yeah, they'd forgotten, or someone had taken a message. So they end up jamming in the front room, and we'll do. And then he ends up sleeping on a sofa for a year with cats all over him. But the drive and determination of the young Steve Rothery and Mick, as Mick points out in the book, it wasn't Fish. Understandably and rightly gets a lot of kudos for the drive and determination that he did absolutely have and still has. But Mick points out, well, it wasn't just him. We all of us were really, really determined to make it.
Yeah.
And my hat goes off to all of the guys and girls in those bands. They were in the contemporary world. A lot of bands can do it as a hobby and be happy with that. Other bands like ourselves are, pros, but at the kind of lower rungs of professional music. But we've got the internet and ways of reaching people that they didn't have back then.
They
had the fan magazine.
Well, again, I said you got a whole chapter on
just
on
the
fanzines. Media and the
Yeah.
fanzines, which was a big part of it back then.
It was huge. It was huge. When we were, I'd get them arriving in the post every few days would be something. And again, I've got cuttings from them here. So as the scene began to get into sounds especially, I mean, there's Solstice were on the front cover of Sounds, which was a big selling newspaper. It was extraordinary, really. And I think as Mike Holmes mentions in there from IQ, there's a kind of love-hate relationship with the press. Obviously, Enemy would always hate it. Sounds would be kind of halfway there, Kerrang halfway there. But it was big coverage, and now we've got Prog magazine, and we can get into classic rock a bit, and Big Train can get into Mojo, but most of the kind of prog bands at a kind of below the pro level will struggle to get that sort of access, whereas those bands were. So it was a scene, and one of the, again, sorry, this interview sounds like I'm annoyed with Fish all the time. I'm not, but
you can be annoyed with Fish.
It can be. That's allowed.
One of the other things that winds me up slightly is I've read a couple of interviews with him where he kind of denies that there was a scene, really, or it was kind of, as he paints it. Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was kind of like very disparate bunch of bands. Marillion were the one kind of leading it and breaking through, etc. But it's bollocks. These guys were all hanging out together. They were supporting each other.
Yeah.
There's loads of great, behind the scenes, backstage photos at Reading and other places, where they're just chatting. They're clearly fellow travellers. They might have been, I don't know whether they were or not. They might have been bitching about each other behind each other's backs, or they may have been supporting each other. I guess probably both of those things at different times.
Yeah.
But it was a scene. There's no question it was a scene, and a very, as I said at the early part of this call, a very important one for following progressive rock artists.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a year older than you, Greg, and I've lived in York all my life, but I was sort of reading. I was getting copies of Afterglow and some of the other fanzines. I was buying the vinyls direct from IQ and the tapes, 7 stories into 8, that sort of thing.
Same here. Yeah.
And it was great to read about the coverage in Sounds, because you really did feel that this was a movement and a collection of bands that were all in it together.
Yeah.
Marillion, as we've talked about, were the sort of the ones who got lucky, really. And eventually, IQ got signed by Phonogram, and that worked out or didn't work out, depending on which way you look at it.
Well, Pallas got a big
Pallas,
but it again, the sort of cruel tides of fate sort of turn against them a little bit. And again, actually, another one of the very good interviews we had was with Ewan from Pallas. That was a fantastic interview, really interesting.
He's a lovely guy. Yeah.
Story. I think that's probably in volume 2, is it?
He left Pallas in '84.
Yeah.
So it's just crept into volume 2. So
something
to look forward to.
That's it is very much it is kind of almost a rise and fall story, really, over the 2 volumes.
See what you did there.
The second volume's called A Playground of Broken Hearts, because it is, it really was, for the most part, a very difficult time for the bands. And then suddenly you had It Bites come out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Just in kind of almost restarting the whole thing.
But
over
signed
again.
to a major as well, signed to Virgin.
Yeah, absolutely. And so they had there's a very little, towards the end of the second volume, we tell the story of It Bites, because they were another important band for me and for many others. And that just came out of nowhere. And I think they supported Marillion as well.
They did. Yeah.
So again, it's all part of the story, really.
It was a case of piecing together lots of disparate views and disparate conversations into a cohesive narrative.
Yeah,
which was fun to do, but quite difficult to do. Yeah. And as I went along, there were certain gaps in the story that needed to be filled. So I had to go back and clarify certain things with certain people. But from the Marillion perspective, I've interviewed Rothers and Mark and Pete and Ian Mosley, Neil Cockle, original keyboard player, and Diz Minnick, the original bass player, who's given us some great stuff.
Yeah.
Diz has a great archive, doesn't he?
He does indeed, and his story was very, very fascinating to listen to. I even managed to get a couple of lines from Brian Jellyman, who doesn't give interviews.
Oh, lady.
I like the comment about Brian Jellyman's name always being spelt wrong.
Correct. So I actually asked him, "How do I spell your name?" So and I got a response with that one. So I was happy to include that.
We've interviewed Marco's Marillion Museum in the last couple of weeks. And
McCormack. Mark's been very, very helpful with
Mark and Claude. We interviewed, and Diz had just given them a copy of the Stone Dome Band demos.
That's right.
And he very graciously let us put a minute of one of the tracks on that episode. But it's incredible to hear such a young fish singing. It's almost as though the tape is playing too fast.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, it's really, really, really interesting stuff.
And that's what fascinates me is piecing together a story from different sources and understanding. I mean, because everybody at the time will have had a slightly different viewpoint of what they saw at the time.
Yeah.
I mean, Greg was talking about the famous occasion when Steve Rothery turned up in his blue Peugeot with a guitar in the back of his car, and I spoke to Steve Rothery about that event and to Mick Pointer about that event directly, and got slightly different stories for me.
I'm sure you did, yeah.
And likewise, I got slightly different stories about how Marillion got their name in the first place from two different people as well. So you ask Mick, he'll say, I had a copy of the Tolkien book on my bookshelf, and we just chose that. You ask Neil Cockle, he'll give you a different story. So we had a song called Silmarillion,
Yeah.
Which I think eventually turned into the web, I think, if my memory serves. And we had some other songs as well we'd written. We wrote them all down and put them in a hat and picked one out, and Silmarillion won. Neither of those could be true, or both could be true. I suppose.
Yeah. Great stories, though. Great stories.
Yeah. Neil Cockle was good value. I had a good phone call with him quite late on in the proceedings, actually. It took a while for me to track him down.
Does he still play?
Yeah, he does, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I'll dig out the name of his band from my notes, and you can put it on your website.
Yeah,
and
we'll do.
Work that through. But yeah, I mean, everybody who's still alive is pretty much still active, which is incredible, really. Pallas have just recorded a new album.
Yeah.
Marillion obviously have continued to be successful. Just announced all those dates next year. And Dragon are literally starting their tour this evening on the day we're talking.
Yeah.
And they've
I'm going to
done well.
going to see him on Saturday and Sunday.
Oh, cool.
And best of all, I think, is the renaissance of Solstice in the last 2 or 3 years.
Yes.
Their
absolutely.
2 albums are absolutely brilliant. And I knew nothing about their music before this time last year, I have to say. Although I'd interviewed Andy Glass a couple of times over the years. And he sent me their 2 CDs. And I thought, wow, this is wonderful. And I've so far failed to see them twice in the last few months.
I saw them support IQ a couple of years ago in Bury. Amazing.
Yeah, they're all playing really well. I mean, Solstice I saw a couple of weeks back, and I hadn't seen them since the early 80s, and I have to say I loved that band passionately, and they're even better now, which is extraordinary,
It's so joyous, though, isn't it?
It's completely joyous, and it's just bursting with energy. And I remember Andy just playing. I've said this to him myself. These are extremely long guitar solos back in the day, which were completely attractive to my musical mind, and so I used to adore him when he'd go off on these long solos, which he still does. And of course, there's a story in the book about the
guitar.
The sad loss of the Yamaha SG-2000.
Steve Rothery's guitar.
Oh, I haven't got to that.
When we interviewed him, I've got one here, and I waved it in front of Steve and Andy Glass. But it's quite it was.
Yeah, I think that story's in the next volume, so
yeah,
it won't be in the
volume
first
2,
one.
I think, but it's still quite. Again, it's quite raw. These
Yeah.
guitars cost a fortune back in the day, and
for those maybe some of the listeners don't know the story, but basically,
I think the moral. Well, just tell the moral, which is never lend a guitar to a hippie.
Never lend a guitar to a hippie. Yeah. So Steve Rothery lent his prized Yamaha guitar to Andy Glass, who promptly had it nicked out the back of their van. And he still feels the guilt about it.
It's a theme, though, isn't that why Neil Cockle was kicked out of the band? Because he left the keyboard in the back of the car and it was unlocked.
Yeah, same deal.
Lock the car. That's the thing. That's
exactly.
the moral.
Exactly. But one thing I will say, I've had a few. I have a real job, like all of us do as well. And this is all done in my spare time over the last year and a half. But I've had a few jobs over the years, and I have a way of working how this is a bit of a rambling story, but I'll get to the point. I have a way of working how satisfied I am with a job by working out the number of idiots you have to deal with day to day.
Oh yes.
Right? And I call it the twat coefficient. I'm sure we can say that on your podcast.
Say what you like. Yeah.
And if your twat coefficient is 0, you're probably going to have a nice, happy job, right?
Yeah.
So I applied that to the people I'd spoken to, these 85 people, over the course of 6 months last year. And it's exactly the same thing, that all absolutely brilliant, lovely, helpful, friendly people, which you might have expected, one or two bad apples in the barrel, but genuinely there were none at all. And that was really, really refreshing. One or two of them wanted to read bits of the book and approve it, and we kind of helped a little bit along the way there, without trying to give away our editorial control, and we were happy to do that. But most of the people, once you'd spoken to them, were absolutely, genuinely lovely. And the only time I was nervous in the whole process, you remember this, Greg, is when we interviewed Steve Rothery on a Zoom call, because I saw that guy in 1985 on stage, and suddenly there he was, and I completely dried up, didn't know what to say. And but he was very, very gracious, and we got there. We got through it in the end. So twat coefficient 0 for this project. It's been great.
We've had exactly the same experiences doing the podcast since we started. We've not had one nasty person, not one person who hasn't been absolutely lovely and great time. And the only time I think we've ever really been nervous with anybody was when we interviewed Steve Hogarth.
Oh yeah.
But we've had like Ian Mosley and Lucy and people on who we weren't worried with because we already knew them. We already knew them. But with Steve Hogarth, it was a case of we don't really know him. Like,
He just talked about his solo career, and that was fine.
Yeah.
He loved it. He loved it. But Andy, I think I get the impression from the bit of the book that I've read that even though the majority of the bands never hit the big time, they look back on that period of their life with great affection. It was
the golden period. Absolutely. Yeah. It was the golden period. I remember interviewing Ed Percival. Ed was the singer in Airbridge, and also auditioned to replace Jeff Mann in Twelfth Night, actually, and got down to the last 3.
Did he?
Along with Andy Sears and another singer called Axe was his name. Spoke to all 3 of those guys as well. But I remember asking Ed about headlining the Marquee, because Airbridge headlined the Marquee maybe 3 or 4 times in that period. And I put a quote in there in the book about that, and he said, walking out from the tiny dressing room into that room and feeling the incredible pressure of the very close atmosphere in there. I never went to the Marquee. Greg went there many times.
Once.
Tiny, tiny room, right? Low ceiling, bright lights, everybody's on top of each other. And he said he knew that when he'd walked on that stage that he'd finally made it. And I guess everybody who's ever done that in that scenario, in that period, probably still feels the same today.
Yeah.
And it's the truth. And we can think about successful musicians over the last 60 years. None of them has ever retired. None of them has ever retired because they are artists and they're creators, and you can't retire. You play until you drop dead. And that's the same for the classic guys in the 60s. McCartney's 82 and he's still doing it. And I think it's the same kind of thing, is that everybody who we spoke to still has that nagging feeling at the back that, one day I'll be able to, get that feeling again of the buzz of playing.
You're just chasing
towards
it,
a big crowd.
Just chasing it.
Just chasing it.
Yeah. Greg, originally, Andy wasn't going to be the author of the book, was he?
Oh, that's harsh.
Well, it's in your book. It is in your book. I've read that.
No, so I mean, my original approach was to Jerry Ewing. I thought he would I knew that he was involved, writing fan magazines back in the day, and obviously his name carries a lot of weight in the world. So we spoke to him quite some time ago, but he's a very busy guy, and I think I know that he would have liked to have written the book, but we never reached a position where he absolutely confirmed that work was underway. And in fact, for a while I thought I would write it, but it bigly changed. Just eats all my time up, so it was just kind of a nice happenstance, really, that Andrew kind of stumbled into my life, and picked up the threads, because I wouldn't have had the time to do the level of research. And that was the thing for me. The Mike Barnes book on the 70s prog scene is 600 odd pages, and it does it justice. It needs that level of storytelling to make sense of it, and very much as Andrew said when Francis just said, don't be a pair of, whatever his expression was. Just do it over 2 volumes. It was like oh yeah, why didn't we think of that? Right, rather than just trying to cut a lot of the human stories out of it or make it too brief. So it's been really good that we've managed to get these not quite to market, but almost to market, and we look forward to hopefully people enjoying, reminiscing of their younger days, and also getting behind the music. At the end of the day, we all want people to be, supporting music, the players and the fans, etc. That's what is, that's a shared love, isn't it? So if this helps people to kind of rekindle their relationship with prog rock a bit, then I think that would be a very good thing.
And I think around about the same time as the book comes out, Cherry Red are about to reissue the early Pallas albums in a box set.
They are.
So the book's out on the 21st of June, I think.
Yeah.
And it must be round about the same week the Pallas box set comes out.
Oh, that's good. That's great.
So it's good timing for that. And I know Jerry did an article in Prog just before Christmas, was it? On this
after.
After, on this same sort of subject, wasn't it?
Yeah, they've done a couple. I mean, Prog magazine, I don't know how many issues it's gone through now, but it's over the years they've done a couple of major articles on the 80s prog scene. Again, because it's an important part of the whole progressive rock world. We were interested in seeing that article, and we'll be talking to prog, and obviously they'll be reviewing it and hopefully getting the word out about our book.
And Jerry was kind enough to write the foreword for Volume 1.
Yeah,
he reminisced about it, which was great.
Yeah.
We were able to. He actually sent me a photograph of him in the 80s, which was unfortunately unusable because it was low res. But I really wish I could have used it because it's classic, absolutely classic picture. And we in the very beginning of the book, there's an introduction I wrote, which was pretty much the first thing I wrote actually, which was imagining a tall, slightly earnest, double denimed young man walking towards the Marquee Club in Soho. Of course, that's Greg very clearly.
Yeah.
And going through the doors and the people who we met there and the characters who were there. And Jerry is one of those characters in that introduction. Russell and Roger Morgan of Afterglow also make a kind of an anonymous appearance. We include Stephanie Bradley in there, who spoke to us very, very fondly about those times. And we managed to get Lemmy and Noddy Holder into that section as well, who propped up the bar and played Asteroids. I mean, a lot of people who were there at the time will remember that, And it always used to amaze me when Greg first told me that he would travel down. I mean, he can probably tell the story himself as he's sitting in the room with us, but he would travel down from Birmingham to Euston, walk across London, see the concert aged 17 or 18 or whatever, and then get the last train back to Birmingham and the night bus home to Sutton Coldfield. And he'd do that every week.
Yeah.
I mean, that's dedication.
It was the problem is the night bus only ran once an hour, and the last train would get back in just past the hour. So I'd have to wait 50 minutes for a bus, and then it would drop me off 3 miles from home. I'm sounding like four Yorkshiremen sketches.
Careful.
We got one Yorkshireman.
One Yorkshireman.
But it was, they were kind of halcyon days, really. And Stephanie remembered them exactly the same way, just, the formative years, and you've got more energy and all of those things. But yeah, I would get home at 4 and probably sleep through till midday or whatever, and I would keep these scrapbooks and all those things. And yeah, the character that Andrew creates at the start of the set of the book, alongside other characters, there is all basically true.
That was my get in to the mindset of writing the book. Is what would that character be doing, and what would he want to know about today?
Yeah.
The fact that it's based on Greg is helpful, but it's not necessarily him alone, right? But a fascinating story of the ins and outs, major record deals, falling outs, incredible sackings. We go into detail about Diz being sacked, about Mick being asked to leave. He asked me never to say being sacked, about being asked to leave. Mark Kelly coming in and from the Marillion side. Of course, Fish deciding what he did in late '88 comes into volume 2 as well, and the early years of H as well, of course, in '89 as well. And there's Noughts of Strangers Folk. It's a good northern saying, but it's true.
It is, yeah.
And what we were able to do was get the voices of 80 or more people who were directly involved in that scene, in that period.
Yeah.
And, it's only pop music at the end of the day, right?
No. More important than that.
But it's more important than that.
It's more important than that.
Actually, I asked each of the guys in Marillion the same question after they had the success with Kaylee in sort of spring '85. What I asked them directly, I remember asking Ian Mosley, what was it like to be a pop star then? Same for Pete, same for Steve, and same for Mark. And their answers will all be in volume 2. Yeah. But they all gave me slightly different twists on what it was. And Steve Rother was hilarious because he said I couldn't go down the supermarket to do my shopping without being recognised.
That's brilliant. It's brilliant. Greg, what if I was to ask you for your favourite sort of memory of the Marquee, could you narrow it down to one gig or one band?
I was there. I can guess the answer.
I was there for the last 12th Night shows with Jeff.
Yeah.
So that would be extremely moving, and that really did feel like the end of an era. And for that band, and also for me and a lot of people in the audience. So that was important. I saw Marillion there a few times. The first time I saw them was at General Wolfe in Coventry, and I was one of the guys that got drilled by the microphone stand in Forgotten Sons. And, you could very much feel the intense. I mean, actually, bloody hurt as well. He was not hanging around with that. But there was he was absolutely an intense frontman, and certainly was able to lead the band and let the guys in the rest of the band focus on, playing their instruments beautifully. So that was a very, very good moment, a very interesting moment as well. And the Reading Festival was, I was at that Reading Festival, the '83 one, and it just felt like our day, our weekend. Our bands were there. My bands were there. My boys and girl, and it was very, very exciting. And I think that's one of the things that Andrew's been able to capture in the books is the hope and the dreams.
Yeah.
And then the tragedy, the sort of Greek tragedy of a number of individual tales, but also band tales as well. So yeah, it is a very human book. It's a very human story. And I urge people to purchase it.
I think it's fantastic. I mean, recommend it really highly. It's brilliant. I was just looking at the other books that Kingmaker have put out. I think I have everything bar one. I think I just don't have the Threshold book, but if you've got any of the previous books, the Mark Kelly book or the Big Train book, the quality of those is fantastic, and I'm sure that this is going to be exactly the same when I get the physical copy in my hands.
We try and we don't. We're a low volume publisher, so everything is done. It's very much focus and attention to detail on a small number of books at a particular point in time. And we're very proud of what we do, and we try and join the things up that we find interesting. As we've all got, as Andrew said, we've got books on our shelves and CDs, and it's that combination of music and words that particularly float my boat. And I suspect that all of us on this call. So yeah, if we can keep doing what we do with the help of people like Andrew to get those books to market, then that's a good thing.
That's good. And I'm going to say I'm really, really impressed with you, John, on this call, because I know how massive a big Train fan you are. So I'll out you, because
thanks for that.
You'll be desperate to, because I know when we were talking, you were saying, "Oh, can I ask Greg about the new album and things?"
No, I said to Andrew I won't.
Well, that's very flattering. Thank you. Thank you.
I came to 2 of the King's Place gigs, and
oh wow, back in the day.
I've seen you. Where else? I did a couple of Cadogan Halls. I think I'm doing Whitley Bay on the new tour because it's
fantastic.
Nice venue.
Yeah, the Playhouse. Yeah, yeah.
But the new album is wonderful. I know
Oh,
we're not
thank you very much.
like that, but you've been told that by lots of people. It's great.
And
Thank you.
you've
I
gone
appreciate it.
you've gone through a lot over the last couple of years, and it's kudos to
Well,
you
yeah, I
for,
mean,
it's
we talk about hopes and dreams, and we've had our own experience of dreams and nightmares, really, and so it was a deep decision for us to try to carry on or not, and we tried to do so, and what with the new album, we really tried to put all of our everything into it that we could do to make it as strong a recording as we could, and I think I think people are understanding that it was. Some people can't contemplate us carrying on without David, and I was one of those people to start with.
Yeah.
But I think many people now are accepting that we still have something to offer. And I'm very privileged to be surrounded by, a lovely set of bandmates who, have helped pick me up really and put me back on my feet. So, as we said a few minutes ago, there's you kind of, I don't want to die on stage, but you kind of, in either way of the meaning of that word, either having a terrible show or literally falling off the stage, Tommy Cooper style or whatever. But it is hard once you get into becoming a touring musician. It is hard to think of your life not having those elements in it. It does become something that you become very passionate about. There's that connection between the audience and
But I think the fans can see the heart in the right place.
Say again?
So I think that the fans can see that your heart and the band's heart's in the right place.
Yeah,
and it's all genuine.
We could see. Yeah, that's it. That's what makes a rock gig special. It's the interplay between the fans and the audience. And that's why this, filming or everything is it does wind us up a bit because there's a barrier almost. And my memories of the early 80s Marquee stuff and things were, it was just very intimate.
Yeah.
Everybody together and just absolutely just rooting for the bands, and it was a wonderful time. And so we I've had one or two experiences in my life where it's felt a bit like that, and sadly never got to play the Marquee, but it's been a privilege to write to set up a situation where Andrew can write about it, and for us to do our own thing because of those 80s.
It's plain that you're both fans. That comes across in the book. Yeah. Andrew writes about it with a real passion and the attention to detail, and to commission it and edit it.
Yeah,
you're both fans. You're both fans.
That's exactly right. We're both passionate about music, and
it's an interesting situation. Yeah, I wasn't particularly familiar with the music of quite a few of these bands before I started to have to learn and research about them. So not really heard any Pallas, Pendragon or Solstice at all, and a little bit of IQ.
Yeah,
Marillion quite well, knew Twelfth Night very well, of course, as well. And actually on the flip side of that, I didn't know anything of Big Train's music really till a year ago. So wow. I'm a very late. There's
a lot to discover then, isn't there?
There's a lot to discover.
Just a bit.
and I've been enjoying doing that over the last period.
Yeah.
I was on a call with Alberto this morning on a completely separate subject, actually, and he's such a brilliantly lovely guy, and he fits so well into that scene that, somehow, somewhere, Greg's found the only guy in the entire world who could do what he's doing today, somehow. And that fills my heart with such joy.
That's exactly right. Yeah, he's a bundle of passion, energy, and compassion.
Yeah, I saw the band in Birmingham last year, and he comes across really well. He's different again to David, obviously. I think now you've got this album with Alberto firmly in the lineup.
Yeah,
I'm really looking forward to the shows this year.
Me too. I'll be in Manchester and London.
Yeah.
I was in Birmingham last year as well.
Well, there you go.
Excellent.
Look, guys, it's been brilliant to talk to you.
Oh, thank you very much.
I've got one last story for you, John.
Go for it.
One last story to finish off.
Go for it.
To finish off, we had lots of really good quotes from lots of really interesting guys, but the one that made me laugh out loud the most was from Nick Barrett of Pendragon. When I first asked him about how did he concentrate on being a musician when he knew when he was still at school, because the first gig that Pendragon did was on the day
that they finished school.
Yes,
He said to me that he'd seen a copy of a Gibson Les Paul in the Stroud Music Centre, in the window of the Stroud Music Centre, where he grew up, and he just couldn't stop thinking about that guitar. And he said he was at school in a biology lesson, and the teacher's saying, now the penis enters the vagina at this point and ejaculates into the vagina. And all that Nick could think about was, how do I raise 40 quid for that fucking guitar?
There you go. That's a brilliant.
Can we use that? You have to bleep that out.
No, we'll use that. That's a great way to end the episode. But yeah, the book's available from Burning Shed.
It is.
So please have a look at it. It's highly recommended. I'm sure part 2 will be just as good. I can't wait to see that. But thank you very much for your time this evening, guys. It's been great.
Absolutely,
to speak
pleasure.
to you.
Our pleasure.
Lee, and thanks, Greg.
Great. Take care.
Thank you very much. It was really great to speak to those two, and they were so, really passionate about what they were talking about. It was great.
Oh, great. I really, really enjoyed this week.
And there's some fantastic Marillion content in the book. There really is. But yeah, it's highly recommended. Anyway,
well, guys,
thank you very much for listening. I hope you found it interesting as we have. And all there is to say is it's good night from me.
And it's good night from him.
Take care.
And stay alive. Yay. Thanks for listening to Planet Marzipan Podcast. Please like and subscribe from whichever platform you get your podcasts from. You can contact us at planetmarzipanpodcast@gmail.com and check out Marillion.com, fishmusic.scot or fishmusic.eu for all the good stuff.